Bitcoin. 7 years ago, most people didn't know what it was. It maybe heard the word, but didn't really know what it meant. How can we use this as a method of payment? At that time, anything blockchain was all the craze. We gave them the liquidity and we guaranteed their payment. You click a button and it's putting your signature on it. The company name TessPay, it actually stands for Transaction Escrow Settlement System. That if you want to send an email to somebody in the other side of the planet, to Japan, China, wherever, it'll arrive there in seconds. I cannot send a payment to them. So essentially, I have a plan to create a new system that would allow people to do just that. You get in the car, you push the start button. Same thing happens with payments. There's no reason why people need to know all the detailed technology behind it to make it happen.
You actually resolved an issue that people couldn't resolve for ages.
Hello and welcome to ICA Podcast. ICA Consulting is an international business consultancy with head office in London. We strive for quality and speed of growth of your business, supporting our clients on each stage of their development. Please visit our website to learn more about our services and get in touch. Our guest today is the creator of Transaction Escrow Settlement System, the CEO and director of TessPay, Mr. Jeffrey Mason.
Welcome to ICA Podcast. So good to see you here, and it's very valuable that it's your first interview, the real interview. That's not a lie.
Well, thank you for having me.
It would be very interesting to learn your story directly from you, Jeff Mason.
All right. Well, I guess going back far enough, when I was younger, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I'd always been interested in technology. But when I started university, I always had it in my mind that I needed to become an accountant first, because somebody put the idea into my mind that you could have the best business idea, but if you don't know how to operate the business, you can't make the dollars and cents work, that the business is ultimately going to fail. So I had in my mind that the best training ground to be an entrepreneur, that I should first pursue accounting. So that's what I did. I went to University of Toronto, did commerce and economics, and then afterwards I became a chartered accountant with Ernst & Young. Now the designation has changed. Yeah, big firm. Anyway, so nowadays the Canadian American organizations have merged, and now we're all called CPAs, Certified Public Accountants. So anyway, so I did that accounting background. And then very shortly after, I probably spent a few years at Ernst & Young doing auditing. And then I figured I'd done my minimum and I could now jump into the technology entrepreneurial world. That was really my passion.
Finally!
Yes.
Okay, and what did you decide to do?
So the first thing I did was opened up an ISP, Internet Service Provider business in Toronto. So at the time, simple, in those days, we're talking about, I'm dating myself now, but basically we're talking about the connections were all done with modems. And then a business connection was 128K ISDN line. And then you had T1 lines, and eventually became fiber optics for the faster speed. So anyways, in the early days, I was literally going out to people's houses and connecting their modems for them, because it's not like today where the connections is done for you. Yeah. So back in those days, we had the software was nowhere near as sophisticated. Everybody was using PCs. So trying to help people over the phone who were not very tech savvy to begin with, very, very difficult. So that was kind of how I got started as an entrepreneur in technology. And then eventually we ended up acquiring another business that was in the same space, and they happened to have a data center. So at that point we had, a small data center in Toronto. And then eventually, I guess in the last 6 months of running that business, because we ended up selling it, I got interested in voice over IP. So, yeah, which is basically long distance communication using IP technology, essentially. Anyways, after the internet service provider business was sold, I started working on telecom business, and I functioned essentially as a traditional broker. Probably what most people don't realize when a long distance call is made using voice over IP technology, probably they don't even know that VoIP technology is being used for that call. But there could be many, many intermediaries where the call passes through these different switches before, from the origination end to the termination end. And of course, all of this happens in milliseconds, so people don't realize that. Anyway, so I was a broker that essentially was buying and selling minutes and obviously trying to earn a margin in between. I guess back in 2017, somebody who I knew from telecommunications industry came to me and they said, we should do something with telecom and Bitcoin. And I didn't really know very much about Bitcoin at the time, actually.
Nobody's
and so I knew a little bit about it.
Well,
that's true too. So I knew what I did know about Bitcoin at the time is that it was volatile. And the long distance voice over IP wholesale market, which is what I was trading in, has very, very small margins. So I thought, how can we use this as a method of payment? Yes, of course, you can do fast transactions, faster than doing bank wires, but how are we going to deal with the volatility issue? This doesn't make any sense. So, and then I started thinking about it and I thought, let me research this a little bit. So I started digging into Bitcoin. And at the time, then I finally understood the technology behind Bitcoin, the blockchain, which of course, was a term that, I don't know, let's say 7 years ago, most people didn't know what it was. It maybe heard the word, but didn't really know what it meant. Still, even today, there's probably a lot of people that don't know what it means. But let's just say there's an awful lot more people that today do know what a blockchain is. So anyways, I came to understand the underlying technology of Bitcoin. And in particular, the Ethereum network had made use of something called smart contracts. So I thought, oh my God, it just kind of popped in my head at that moment. I was like, wow, we could use that technology to have the carriers enter into smart contracts with each other and link all these parties together.
Before you go further, can we just look at the smart contracts for a second?
All right.
I understand this is blockchain technology is applied to the contractual obligations of each, but how exactly does it work, and is it safer like that, or what's the benefit of it?
I guess you can think of, in this particular instance, it's a way of creating an indelible record of the transaction that has occurred. So in our case, the smart contracts, they do not replace the traditional legal contracts. You still have a traditional legal contract between carriers. But the smart contract becomes a programmatic representation of the executable elements of that legal contract. So in the case of telecommunications, that tends to be what we call the rate deck, which in simple terms, think of it like a spreadsheet. It's got a list of all the dial codes that represent each country. So here we're in the UK today. So the mobile country code here, 44 for the country, 7 is mobile. So 447, and then let's say Vodafone, their next digit starts with 2, and then you'd have a rate for them. And then, okay, what's the rate for EE? What's the rate for BT, etc. So anyways, you're just basically listing all of those rates that a supplier is offering to a customer. And so all of that gets loaded into the contract. And then usually it's the supplier that creates the contract. And then they send it, think of it like an offer that has been sent over to the customer. So the customer receives this rate deck or this price offer. And if they accept the terms, they basically click a button and then they're digitally signing that contract. Much like you'd expect to sign a DocuSign contract today. Somebody sends it to you, you click a button and it's putting your signature on it. So same kind of idea. So once the contract has been signed by both parties, now it's recorded into the blockchain together with those rates. So neither party can then get into a dispute about what the rates were. Because absent using our technology, that was one of the things that carriers used to dispute a lot. Is the rates. Because what happens is that most of the rates are distributed by sending Excel spreadsheets. So a supplier will send a rate offer to someone in an Excel spreadsheet. And so let's say they're already doing business with each other and now there's a rate amendment. So a rate amendment usually involves an increase in price. So they'll send a rate amendment across to their customer and they'll kind of assume that the customer received that rate increase and has adopted it into their routing engine, but maybe they haven't. So essentially it's like kind of negative confirmation, which is not very good confirmation.
I'm just realizing it just happened to me.
Yeah, in what way?
Well, the internet contract got increased in price, and I just got told, "Oh, now you pay 60 quid," and I used to pay 48.
They probably, gave her some advance notice, and in the fine print, there was somewhere that allowed you to opt out. But of course, nobody ever does.
I mean,
So-
what I'm just realizing that it does happen in real life, and it happens a lot.
Yeah, but your example is a little bit different because let's say your internet service provider at home gives you a rate increase, you're probably not going to change your provider because they went up by 50p or something like that. Whereas in the business context of doing wholesale trading, you have multiple suppliers that are all offering you termination to the same destination. And so we use what's called a least cost routing engine, or LCR, we call for short. So you want to obviously put your lowest cost termination partner at the top of your list. And all this all happens digitally. So you load all of your rate decks and your different suppliers, and the system automatically puts the one with the lowest price at the top of the list. So the next call that comes in is going to come to that cheapest one. Only when that cheapest connection as capacity has been reached, then it'll bounce on to the second one, and so on. So if somebody was your lowest rate, somebody sent a rate increase, they didn't capture the rate increase or didn't realize that it came in, they might continue routing calls to that particular destination thinking they're getting the cheapest rate, and they're not. And at the end of the month, the vendor sends the bill and the customer is like, wait a minute, I didn't agree to this rate increase. And, well, yes, you did. I sent over this spreadsheet to you on, October the 12th. Anyway, so in the contracts of the smart contract, that's not possible because both parties are explicitly signing the contract, so they can't say, no, that didn't happen, or there's a misunderstanding.
That's great.
Yeah.
I like it, an idea. That's brilliant. How did you come up with it? I mean, yes, I got the idea that you researched what happened in Bitcoin and was their backend, and then you sort of figured that you can use it for legal things.
No, not so much legal things. I mean, I was more thinking about what the challenges were in the telecommunications space. So in the wholesale voice over IP space, the two challenges were disputes and payment assurance, and liquidity as well. So the payment assurance issue is, am I assured that I'm going to get paid? Obviously, everybody wants to get paid, but it's especially important in wholesale telecom because the margins are so low. So you're a high volume but low margin business. So if somebody doesn't pay you on time, it's extremely painful. And it's very, very difficult. It's difficult enough if you suffer a loss in a domestic environment. So let's say you're in the UK or back from the United States. If I suffer a loss, it's very difficult to recover that loss from a party that is uncooperative. Yes, you have the legal system, but the legal system is not very efficient. Obviously, very expensive to hire lawyers, and the outcome is indeterminate. Even if you win your legal case, maybe the party doesn't have the ability to pay. So anyway, so in telecom with the margins so low, it's very, very important to have payment assurance. So that was one problem I was looking to solve. And then the second issue was liquidity. So almost all calls originate with large carriers because they're the ones that have all the retail customers that are ultimately making the calls. So now the large carriers, being large, they can demand favorable payment terms to themselves. So in our industry, that's generally 30-30 payment terms, which means there's an invoice once every 30 days and then another 30 days to pay. So that means if you're a supplier to a tier 1 operator, you've got to provide 60 days of financing. So the thing is that it's a very uneven, set of players. So you've got a tier 1 operator that could be a multi-billion-dollar company. And then you've got a supplier that's providing services to that tier 1 operator that could be a very small organization. Certainly nothing, their revenues are nothing billion, So, so anyway, so for them to provide liquidity to the big boys is not very easy. So what we ended up doing is providing some financing to those carriers. And we did that by purchasing the invoices from suppliers that were selling to large operators. And because in that case, we knew we had a very high quality receivable. So we were okay to wait the 60 days to get paid. And so essentially we were able to make an advance payment to the supplier at the top end of the chain. And then that meant that any other supplier on our network that was downstream could also be paid instantly.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially everybody was being paid 1 day post-paid in arrears.
Wow.
So essentially you're providing 1 day credit. So nobody has a problem doing that. And essentially we guarantee the payment. So, and the way we did that is we give every participant on our system a virtual switch.
Yeah.
And so all the calls physically pass through our environment, and together with the smart contracts, we're able to mediate those calls, meaning to take the detailed call records and marry them up with the rates that are in the smart contract. And we're able to produce what we call a pro forma daily invoice.
Okay.
And so then we'll tally that up. Obviously that happens in an automated way.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone from the administration team will eyeball it to make sure it makes sense before kind of clicking a button to settle the transaction. And then the transaction posts into what we call the blockchain wallet. So everybody on our platform also gets a blockchain wallet. Just think of it like having a ledger account if you're in a brokerage firm. And so let's say it was $10,000 or pounds of service, then we would post that value into their wallet. And then if they had a supplier that was connected on our platform through another smart contract, and let's say that invoice was for $9,500. So we'd simultaneously take $9,500 out of supplier A's wallet and put it into supplier B's wallet. And that process would continue down to the final terminator. So this way, everybody was guaranteed payment. So we gave them the liquidity and we guaranteed their payment. And then the other benefit is we essentially eliminated disputes, because now we're the intermediary. We have no motivation to manipulate any of the records. In fact, it's in our interest to make sure the records are accurate. So essentially in our environment, we haven't had any disputes between the customers and suppliers because our records are always accurate.
How long did it take you to do that?
To do what?
From the moment that you found that it could, like, from the moment you started to look for a solution up until you got it into a company?
This colleague of mine came to me, I want to say in like June of 2017. Anyway, so as I said, after I kind of spent, I don't know, a couple of days looking into the thing, I came up with this idea, and then I passed it back to this other person, and then he went and talked to a few other people, and then he came back and said, oh, it's a great idea, we should do this. I'm like, yeah, but I'm busy doing all kinds of other things. So then he came back to me maybe a week later, and he says, okay, I got a meeting for us at an investment bank in Toronto next Tuesday. And I was like, okay. Does that all go? And, you know, I'm not the kind of person that likes to go to something unprepared. So literally the day before I went there, in like, I don't know, an hour or two, I whipped together a PowerPoint presentation. And then I had this meeting with this investment bank in Toronto. And at that time, anything blockchain was all the craze. So they were very enthusiastic. And so they literally wanted to like sign it on the spot. So they literally called their lawyer to come down to the office, who wasn't very far because it was downtown Toronto, and literally started inking out, creating a new corporation on the spot. And then they said, oh, well, you know, we'll raise you the money in the next couple of weeks. And so I left there thinking to myself, okay, let's see if that actually happens, you know. Because usually when you're raising capital for a startup business, it doesn't happen that fast. Anyways, I kind of remember meeting them at the beginning of August. And they actually had us funded by the end of October. So that's pretty darn quick. So that's how TessPay got started. So from that point, we built a prototype system that took us about maybe 3 months.
3 months is very quick.
Well, this is a prototype. This is not for the, you know, all singing, all dancing system. And then it took about another 9 months, I would say, to build the let's call it the production ready system. So we were ready to start taking on beta clients about 9 months later. However, it did take probably the best part, maybe another 9 months after that, before we lined up all the financing. Because remember the liquidity portion I was talking about earlier,
Yeah.
we were not using our own capital for that. We didn't raise capital for that purpose. So we were using financial partners in the background. So we would purchase an invoice as TessPay Finance, and we'd immediately back-to-back resell that invoice to a financial partner.
Right.
So anyways, it took time, of course, to find those financial partners, get them comfortable with our model, and everybody likes to walk before they run, of course. So anyway, so we basically started doing live business in October of 2019.
2 years it took. Well, a year and a half almost. Wow.
Well, I would call it 2 years from when we were originally funded until we were live.
Wow, very, very impressive for a startup company with no funding.
Yeah, and actually the other thing is I think we could have done it a lot faster had it not been for the fact that a lot of the investors wanted us to go public. So like literally a month after we raised the initial capital, the investment banker came back to me and said, oh, I've got some people that want to provide you more capital, some millions of dollars, but the deal is you're going to take the company public. And so I was like, okay. So, but at that time, I didn't realize essentially what I was getting myself into. And so that ended up consuming a lot of my time. So I don't mean to criticize the public market process, because obviously it can be very valuable in the right way. I'm just saying, you know, on the other side of it is an awful lot of time. So I'm just saying that it took a lot of my time. And for a small company that doesn't have a lot of resources, yes, we raised capital, but we didn't raise like, you know, $100 million. So we still had to be careful with the capital we did raise. A lot of my time was split, let's say, pursuing this public market initiative. And it's one of those things that's reaching the goal line can be somewhat elusive. I mean, you think you're on the 10-yard line, I use a American football analogy, and you get closer, you're just about to cross the line, and then they move the stakes on you. And so I don't mean people that are actually literally manipulating things. It's just literally it always seems to take longer. There's something else that needs to be done, another hurdle that has to be crossed, something else the regulators want. Anyway, so that consumed a fair bit of our time. So I argue we could have done it maybe a year earlier.
Well, easy on that. I mean, it's fun. It got there in the end. That's the main thing.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
And at the moment, you are developing a very useful in the new world company. Think about that. You actually resolved an issue that people couldn't resolve for ages.
Yeah, actually, so the company name TessPay, the first part of the name, well, last part, pay is obvious, but the first part, Tess, is actually an acronym. And so it actually stands for Transaction Escrow Settlement System. So my idea was not to be only telecom. It was just that was the industry that I was the most familiar with. So it made sense that I would actually start in that industry.
Yeah.
So now that I've been doing telecom for a while, I actually now want to branch out into other areas. So we developed a platform for construction here in the UK. There's some other elements related to the financing piece, more business side, was the technology side that need to be put in place to have that get some real traction. But we're also pursuing another opportunity in Dubai.
What's in Dubai?
Well, so specifically there, this is also construction, but quite different than what we were considering doing here in the UK. So the project that we've named it in Dubai is RECAP. So it stands for Real Estate Commission Advance Payment. So as the mouthful explains, essentially, if you are a real estate agency, obviously you have agents that do the work to sell. In their case, most of the sales are off-plan apartments or flats, as we call them here in the UK. So let's say, for example, somebody is selling a flat for, $1 million. And the real estate commission is anywhere from 4 to 8%. So that means you've got commissions of $40,000 to $80,000 for the unit. Now, the developers that are building the site, typically the way it works is, and so by the way, they call it off plan. What that means is that the building is not yet constructed. So it means that it's either in the planning phase or
And renders.
or it's partially under construction.
Mhm.
So once they sell the plan to the would-be buyer from whatever country in the world, then the buyer has to make a deposit. So after they've made the deposit, that kind of solidifies the commitment to that contract. And then the commission invoice is payable.
Mhm.
Now, the payment terms on that tend to be around 90 days. So what we're planning to do is to offer same kind of service that we're offering to provide liquidity to telecom, to provide that same liquidity for this
Residential.
for these off-plan apartment sales. So anyway, so we're going through that process now. So we set up another entity in Dubai for that purpose. We have got the necessary licenses recently. We've been onboarded with the largest bank there as a vendor. And so we're going through the process right now of doing the contractual obligations. And fingers crossed, we'll be ready to go with that. Let's call it the beginning of the year.
Can I ask you like a very like side question?
Yeah.
On the YouTube, you've got an interview at IBM stage.
Okay, that wasn't really an interview, it was a presentation.
It says that TessPay works on the IBM blockchain.
So when we originally constructed the blockchain element of the system, we used IBM's technology Hyperledger Fabric. And initially we were also hosting it on IBM's infrastructure.
Okay.
Since that time, we've moved the technology off of IBM's network, but we're still using the underlying core Hyperledger Fabric. Essentially, to put it into one line, it's a private permission blockchain.
Okay.
So what that means is that only those that are part of the community and have permission can participate and see the transactions. And in addition to that, you can only see the transactions that you are a party to. So obviously you would not want your competitors to know the prices that you are either selling your services to or buying your services from. That's obviously very private information. So only the parties to a contract know the details of that contract. So that's actually really important.
And with all of those technologies that you now have in your hands, are you planning to set up a neobank?
I think you heard a rumor. I wouldn't go as far as to call it a neobank yet, although I do have that aspiration. So my general overall aspiration, or actually let me back up a little bit. I think there's no reason why people cannot make payments to each other instantly and essentially free of charge and with no friction. I mean, it's crazy to me that if you want to send an email to somebody on the other side of the planet, to Japan, China, wherever, it'll arrive there in seconds. In fact, you can have a video call with them. Yet, I cannot send a payment to them? Why can I not send a payment 24/7, 365, and why would it cost me a lot to do it? To me, that makes absolutely no sense. But I know why, but I think it shouldn't be like that, and there ought to be a lot better systems. So
Thanks God there isn't this opinion in
So,
our world and actually a
anyways.
capable person that did that.
So essentially, I have a plan to create a new system that would allow people to do just that. So essentially, same kind of concept of the telecom solution that it came up with, that I want to use other technology in the background, but I don't want the end user to have to worry about all the details of it. They don't need to know it. It's the same way, analogy I always like to use is if you want to watch Netflix, what do? You pick up your remote control and you push the Netflix button. And your TV turns on and goes to Netflix, and then you start scrolling around for your content. So, but you don't need to know how all your components are connected or how that content is connected to your internet service provider and how many routers it went to get to your TV screen. Of course, it's ridiculous. You do not need to know that. That's obvious. Same way when you drive a car, you get in the car, you push the start button, and away you go. You don't need to know more than that. So, same thing happens with payments. There's no reason why people need to know all the detailed technology behind it to make it happen. Let's just say there's a great a fairly large percentage of the population, especially the younger, more tech-savvy population, would be quite familiar with blockchain and the various most prominent cryptocurrencies. Obviously, Bitcoin's the one everybody knows about. If you want to use payments, stablecoins are usually the best for that. So there'd be an awful lot of people that would know what stablecoins are. I still say they're not the majority, but enough people would know what they are. However, to make payments with stablecoins in today's infrastructure is not very efficient.
Right.
And it's fraught with many, many problems. So I essentially want to create a system that will essentially eliminate all those issues, because I believe it ought to be as simple as a smartphone application. So you just literally tap on something, and I want to send money to you. I choose your name from a drop-down list. I choose the account I want it to come from. I type in the amount, bang, send. Which is how a lot of these, cash app type payments function. I don't know what apps they have here in the UK, but I can tell you in the United States, we have things like Zelle, we have Cash App, we have Venmo. And so these applications have made it fairly easy for the consumers to send transactions to each other. I mean, each of them have their own little gremlins that I could gripe about, but, and I suppose there's PayPal. Anyway, so each of these things make it sort of easy to do that. So if I want to send a payment, let's say using Venmo, to pick that as an example, if I already have somebody in my address book, it's pretty easy to choose them from the address book, type the amount, and then with some little description, and pay. Assuming you've got everything set up at that point, right? Because you have to link your bank accounts and so on. So that's relatively easy and hard to make a mistake. So I want to create a full system that would be actually even easier than that, but in that area. So the point is that I want it to be a system that literally the average person could use it. So the analogy I like to make is that people who know how to use, let's say, blockchain technology to make payments, for them, they think it's easy. But, the old adage, everything's easy when you know how. So the analogy I like to use is, could your mother do it? And I don't mean to pick on my mother, but if I were to ask my mother to send a payment of USDT from herself to somebody, she would not have the first clue where to start. And I'm not suggesting my mother couldn't do it. Obviously, if we gave her a set of instructions and, trained her and showed her how to do it, more than show her a video, like you literally have to hold her hand. But the problem is that it's not just an education thing. There are some inherent pitfalls that make it so unappealing. I would never even consider teaching her or suggesting that she do that, because you probably heard, in your age, that if you make a mistake sending a transaction on the blockchain, it's gone.
Yeah.
Like there is no 1-800 number customer service line to call and say, oh my God, I don't know what I was thinking. I copied and pasted the wrong thing and I don't know what happened. It disappeared. Can you get it back for me? No, actually you can't. That's just inherent in the protocol. You send it to the wrong address, boom, it's gone. So, and the thing is, there's so many mistakes you can make. I mean, you've got the obvious mistake of you could have copied and pasted the wrong number. You could send it to the wrong network. A lot of people are like,
additional letter in the address.
Probably if you put the wrong, that mistake probably wouldn't happen, because if you added an additional letter, it would recognize it as an invalid address and probably the transaction would fail. But what would not fail is if you send a valid address, you send a transaction to a valid address, but on the wrong network.
So if I
when I say
on
network,
Ethereum network, but I've set it on Tron network and that doesn't work and that fails. Because
those are two completely different networks, so they don't follow the same format. We have the Ethereum mainnet is ERC20, is the original ERC20 network, and then there are a number of what are called layer 2 networks. I won't get into detail what layer 2 means, but essentially rides on top. There's a number of offshoots of that. You've got optimism, arbitrum, etc., that ride on top of those other networks. Now, there's two kinds of addresses, and probably most people don't know that. So there's an externally owned account, Or there are smart contract addresses. Now, to the end user, they look identical. Well, first of all, how can you recognize them anyways? They're long strings of hexadecimal characters.
No clue
So
what it
it's
is,
just,
to be honest.
it's all like, gobbledygook.
Yep.
Anyways, the point is you cannot visually inspect an address and know whether it's a smart contract address or whether an externally owned account wallet address.
All right.
But there's a very big significance to that. And the significance is that if you have an externally owned account address that you're sending to, and you send it to somebody on the wrong network,
What happens?
you don't lose it. They won't receive it immediately because their method of receiving it is looking at their wallet. And so their wallet is actually using some software. So most people think that the wallet software they have on their phone, their computer, or whatever device they're using is actually their wallet. It's not. The wallet is actually nothing more than your public and your private key.
Okay.
So the wallet software is just what allows you to interact with the blockchain so that you can, as a human being, interact with it appropriately. It's actually the best analogy you can think of is an email, right? So let's say you use Outlook for your email and somebody else uses Gmail. Well, Gmail is not your email. It's just the software. Or Outlook is not your email. It's just software. So your account is with whatever your service provider is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same kind of idea with the blockchain. So essentially your wallet is your public and private key.
Okay.
So anyway, so my point is, so let's say you're on the Ethereum network,
Right.
and I am going to send you a transaction, and you tell me, oh, I'm actually, and I make a mistake. Let's say I make a mistake, and I send it to you on the Optimism network. If you happen to have a traditional externally owned account wallet address, even if I send it to you on the wrong network, you'll still be able to get it. You'll look on your phone, let's say where you've got your software, you won't see it. But because it's the same address on every one of those networks, you can then go and get wallet software. Let's say I sent it to an Arbitrum. You can go get wallet software for Arbitrum using your same public and private key from Ethereum mainnet. You'll be able to access it, so you didn't lose it.
Wow.
But
But you need to go under layer.
well, you need to get the other software, but the point is you don't lose the money
Yeah. That's
or the asset. However, if your address with a smart contract address, it's gone because that address is not mirrored on the other blockchains.
So I lose.
You would lose the asset in that case. So I'm just giving you, I'm not trying to explain all things on the blockchain. I'm just trying to give you a flavor, a sense of the kind of complexities that people would have to understand to avoid all the pitfalls. Or let's say you want to send funds to an exchange. So they give you an address to do that. Oh, here's your Ethereum address. Here's your Bitcoin address. Different networks. You got to understand that concept. Then, I don't know, let's say you record that in some software you have on your computer. And then later, I don't know, you haven't used it for 6 months and you want to send some funds to your exchange. You send it there and then you log in your thing. Oh, it's not there. What's going on? And then you realize, oh, 3 months ago, they sent an email that said, oh, by the way, we've decommissioned these old addresses. Don't use them anymore. Use these new ones because if you do it after such and such a date, you could potentially lose your asset. And it's just like, WTF, go on. So it's just yet another thing so my point is there's no way the average person can contend with all of these issues.
Yeah, that's
So,
horrible. It's
anyways.
one after another.
Yeah.
You know, and the worst thing about it is probably nobody actually explains how to do it, and neither like governments don't have educations to do that, or like even legal underlayer.
But it's emerging technology, so you can't expect it to. So I guess what I'm saying is it's like any new technology that gets pushed out there, there's going to be the early adopters. They're the ones who are the techno enthusiasts, and they're going to be the ones that understand it the fastest. I mean, obviously a huge topic today is AI. That's even more prevalent than talking about blockchain. This is the latest craze. And everybody can see why. I mean, AI is going to change the world. There's no two ways about it. And so most people today for example, they've certainly heard the term AI. Obviously, a lot of people, slightly older generation, they don't really understand what it means. And then you've got other people that have some exposure to it. So probably they've used, let's say, ChatGPT, and they're like, oh, it's actually really cool, it can do these things. But if you really, really want to leverage the technology to get more out of it, you need education. Like someone's got to show you, how do I get the most out of this technology for me in my circumstances and my business practices? And there's no manual for that, really. So, and a lot of this stuff is on the fly. I mean, obviously there's so many companies that are emerging, ones that we haven't even heard of yet today, that are trying to build some new technology. If you're flicking around right now on TikTok or something like that, there's always somebody who wants to tell you about the latest AI site you can go to because it'll do this, that, and the next thing. But so it's a little bit overwhelming. And then, you know, a lot of these things, of course, they want you to pay for them. So you're like, get on there, it's like, oh, you want me to sign up or pay for this? It's like, I don't want to do that before I even know if your product's any good, you know? And then even if you do want to persist with some of those things, you realize there's still a little bit of a learning curve. It's like you're learning a new application every time you go to a new website, you know, with a new AI app. So anyways, all that's frustrating, but this is part of the normal process as things evolve with the new technology. And eventually, like all industries, it'll converge on some solution that everybody decides is the best. And that's what the vast majority of people will use.
Well, we'll see what it is. At
Let's
the
see what
moment,
happens.
I really wanted to ask you this question just purely because it kind of goes along the way with the blockchain and all the crypto theme and subject. Telegram,
Yes.
at the moment, they already have their own wallet, Telegram wallet, which operates on a TON network.
Yeah.
And in that channel that I'm following, it's like 11 million people who are on that channel who are onboarding themselves on the TON network. I, unfortunately, at the moment, I'm not that savvy in the crypto world. So I wanted to ask you, what does it mean? Is it safe? What it is? Like, can you, like, TON network by itself, is it compatible with all the Ethereum, Tron, and all the other networks, or if it's like a completely different thing? Do you know about it?
Okay, so I will tell you, I am not an expert on the TON network, but I know a little bit about it. So I can tell you what I do know about it is it's its own completely independent network. Probably they have bridges between their network and the Ethereum mainnet. So certainly they're not compatible in the sense that you cannot send from a TON network address, let's say USDT, to somebody on Ethereum mainnet. You definitely can't do that. Maybe they have some sort of a mechanism or some bridging mechanism to do that. You certainly cannot do it directly because they're two totally separate networks.
Right.
So now what I understand of that network is that it's got, I think, a number of planned use cases. I think, you know, it tends to be a little bit more focused on social media and gaming. It's meant for very, very high throughput and, you know, very low cost transactions, which I actually believe in, because I think it's actually, I won't say offensive is the wrong word, but I find, let's say, annoying that on the Ethereum network now transactions are getting quite expensive, and it's all over the map because you pay based on network congestion and, you know, some complicated calculate the gas. So it's really weird. I mean, imagine, so if you compare it to regular gas, imagine going to the gas station and today it's $3 a pound, or $3 a gallon rather. And then when you go tomorrow, it's 15. I mean, this is crazy. So, you know, if you're sending a large transaction value, you're sending, I don't know, $500,000 of value, whether the transaction cost is $5 or $15, it doesn't matter, of course. But when you're sending smaller transactions, it does matter. So if I'm sending, I don't know, $2,000 or something, well, I do care if it's like $15 or $5 because it just eats into the margin. If you're doing small transactions and the margins aren't that large on the transaction, well, all of a sudden it eats into it. So initially those transaction costs were quite modest. And that's actually, I think, one of the main drivers to these layer 2 networks, the ones that ride on top of the main network. Essentially what they do is they batch the transactions, and essentially, in a simple term, they post it to the main network afterwards. So you got the benefit of, let's call it, for sake of argument, 100 transactions that got posted to the layer 2 network. So you're only paying one main network fee split amongst 100 transactions. So that's how they can get the transactions down to some penny. In the case of Ton and Telegram, it's their own network. So they can make up the rules and they can make it free or virtually free.
Yeah.
And obviously in their case, they have a huge advantage because they have a massive installed base of Telegram users that they can promote the service to. So although I think now there's some legal separation between the entities, but there was definitely some relationship with them in the beginning.
Right.
Anyways, that's what I know about it.
Okay. And since at this stage, where we're finding ourselves in 2024, so we're all learning.
Exciting things to come, no doubt.
Exactly, yeah, exciting
some
things are
good
coming.
and some bad.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering, is there a way that all those networks can come into one central hub where people actually understand that if I send money through a Bitcoin network, that's going to be that. If I send money through Ethereum, it's going to be that. Da, da, da. So eventually, does it become almost like like the reference from Marvel, from the Doctor Strange and the time machine and the timelines, but they're all coming together and they're all working together. So they're not necessarily strangling each other. At the moment, it's like Binance, Coinbase, all sorts of different companies which try to make money on that. But for the people themselves, not to get sort of ripped off on anything, on the transactions, and have one central hub where they can come there globally, send money to the people they know without any restrictions and all that. Is that possible?
I'm not sure 100% if what you're saying about a central hub is the same way I would think about it. I mean, first of all, we got to talk about the technology layer. So you have all these separate networks and they do not interact with each other.
Right.
And so they're never going to interact with each other because that's defined by their protocols. However, you can create these bridges that will create the connections between these other networks. And I won't go into the detailed explanation of how that works, but it is my plan, that's part of what I plan to build, is to make that transition automatic. So let's say, for example, somebody wanted to send, let's take a simple example, somebody wanted to send USDT on a Tron network to someone on Ethereum mainnet. So to me, if it was in the wallet software, it's like, okay, I'm sending from here and I'm going to there. That's all the user has to specify. If you've got the right software, the software knows what bridges to use and how to route that payment. There's no reason why the end user needs to know that. But there's no reason why they can't do it. Now, that's not to say the transaction will be free, because you're going to have to pay for the cost of the bridge. And obviously you have to pay for the cost of the underlying network. So for example, I don't know, let's say you are on a layer 2 network that's very inexpensive, Arbitrum, and now you want to send to Ethereum mainnet. Well, we can make that happen, but you're going to have to pay the underlying gas cost on the Ethereum main network. There's no way to avoid it. So people would be presented with the option to do it, and they're also told what the cost would be. It kind of calculates it all automatically for you. And if you want to do this, is the cost. Or I suppose the software could be intelligent enough to say, or alternatively, here's another route that you could take. You could ask the recipient to receive it instead on this network to receive it on that network.
So
for
there
example.
will be, at least there will be.
So
transparency.
so the idea is to make it all a lot more simple. But you touched on something else as you were asking your question. You started making reference to Coinbase and Binance.
Yeah.
So these are exchanges. So this is another thing that I think the average person doesn't know. And I'm not trying to suggest that they're unintelligent. It's just there's just so many terms and technical jargon that's thrown around at people, and it's hard to absorb all this. And it's not just an inability for people to understand the technology. It's that, quite frankly, everybody's busy with their lives. I mean, if you are, I don't know, you're an art director. I mean, you don't want to know about all this stuff.
As much as I can.
Honestly, I don't want to know about art directing either. So, everybody has their interests and their specialties. And so they just want to do simple things. They don't need to know all these other things. So coming back to the point of the exchanges is that most people don't understand the difference between custodial and non-custodial. And the reason why that's very important. Well, actually, let me ask you, do you know the difference?
No, not really.
And you're a young
I know
person.
that there's one bullet.
And you're a
That's
young
all I can
person.
see. What is the difference between non-custodial and custodial?
Okay, so what that means is that in the custodial example, it means somebody else has custody of your assets.
What do you mean somebody else? As in the company that is hosting?
Right, so let's take the example of Binance or Coinbase.
Okay.
Those are custodial exchanges. So what that means is that if you wish to do transactions on their exchange, your assets are in their custody, not in your custody.
Okay.
Okay?
That makes it
Something that's non-custodial means that the assets are in your custody. So there's a little expression in the crypto world that says, not your keys, not your assets, or not your money.
Right.
So what they're referring to is that if you don't hold the private key to the wallet address that's been assigned to you, you don't have custody of those assets. So when you send, let's say, I don't know, USDT, Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever, to an exchange, let's say on Binance, they give you a wallet address. So you log, once you've created your account, okay, so you wish to make a deposit, you say deposit, you choose the asset, the network, and then it gives you an address.
Mm-hmm.
So you can copy and paste that address, and you can send something, some asset to that network. When you do, yes, that address is unique to you, but you don't have the private key to that address, which means that you do not have custody. So the moment you send it there, Binance has your assets in safekeeping.
And if all of a sudden Binance collapses, I don't have my money.
Well, obviously that's the risk. So you're taking some serious counterparty risk. Now, obviously you take counterparty risk in many things that you do. It's just that there are protections.
Right.
So actually, there was a fairly large failure of an exchange in the United States a few years ago called FTX. And so I would bet you that 90% of the customers that had their assets on that network did not understand the distinction between custodial and non-custodial. Because when they went down, guess what? Everybody's assets vaporized. $10 billion. Boom, gone.
Jesus.
Yeah. So now, when you use a traditional bank, so here in the UK, obviously you have, HSBC, Barclays, etc. When you give them money, you are giving them custody of your assets. But the difference is these are large, established companies that have been around for a long time. They're regulated. You have insurance protection against the deposits. And that's not the case whatsoever with a cryptocurrency exchange. Now, the difficulty is that if it's very hard for them to provide non-custodial solutions, because in the case of an exchange, they're not going to allow you to place an order on their exchange if they're not holding your asset. So let's say you wish to buy Bitcoin as an example. Mm-hmm. I want to place an order for $100,000 of Bitcoin, which nowadays is only one Bitcoin. That's crazy. So crazy. Anyway, so they're not going to allow you to place an order on the exchange if you don't have the assets to be able to make the purchase. Because obviously, if you place the order and then the order executed, you didn't how are they going to fulfill the transaction? They're not going to say, oh, Paulina, please send in that $100,000 that you promised you were going to send. So that obviously doesn't work. So clearly they have to have your assets on hand. Now, if you had the ability to do essentially instant, and let's say a transaction cost that's so low that would be irrelevant, then you could actually have a non-custodial solution to work with an exchange, because it would mean that you would have your asset, you place an order, that would take the assets out of your non-custodial wallet, let's say put it on Binance, but the moment you cancel the order, boom, the asset comes right back to your wallet. So yes, clearly, as long as you have an open order, you would have some exposure or counterparty risk to the exchange, but that's very, very different to be in a position where you want to close your transactions, or whenever the transaction settles, you purchase the asset, you've immediately got the asset back in your custody. So you've got temporary exposure, which is very, very different than something goes wrong and now everybody wants to make a withdrawal. Well, guess what? The exchange has to approve the withdrawals. Well, when something goes wrong, they stop approving your withdrawals.
Right.
So that's what happened, obviously, with FTX. So, it's just another example of one of the pitfalls that most people are not aware of, and they shouldn't have to be aware of. But this is where we're at in the evolution. So I don't think there's anything wrong per se. It's just where we've got to so far in the crypto revolution. So I personally see crypto as being a really great technology to help create what I was talking about at the outset, where we could have essentially instant payments 24/7, 365 at essentially no cost and not an awful lot of friction. And you've got custody of everything.
Yeah,
So
you own
to
your
me,
money.
there's no reason you can't do that. To me, blockchain technology is an essential element to make that a reality. But there's some development that needs to happen to be able to marry that together with other technologies.
Well, I guess that wraps up our conversation,
Right.
because it's we all know that at this point of time we can't really make definitive conclusions regarding the crypto world and where it's going to go. Everybody is inventing new cryptocurrencies and stacking new stable coins, and
Yes, there's a lot of noise.
life
There's a lot
in
of
it.
noise out there too. And so yes,
Yeah.
people have to interpret what, and we didn't even talk about DeFi apps and all this stuff. So I mean,
well, maybe next time.
maybe next time.
That's
We need
too-
another hour for that.
Yeah, another hour, because it's too much knowledge, to be fair. But I just want to say thank you from all humanity, because no, but I'm being serious. At this stage where nobody knows what they do. Like not a lot of
A
people.
lot of
know
people
what
do,
they
but there's a lot of people that don't.
Exactly. And those two don't talk, which doesn't help. But you, as an individual who has recognized the problem and you found a solution and you don't stop on it, you go further and further, and we're there to help you and support you all the way. And it's great that the TessPay already exists. PowerPay is gonna develop further and create this probably not the most central hub for the whole world, but at least it's going to be the first
We can
step.
aspire.
We can aspire. It's going to be the first step.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.